Hey everyone, Mark Meckler here. And in July of 2024, you may not have gotten to see this, but Rick Santorum spoke at Iowa's Family Leader. Now, this is the most influential political organization in Iowa. It has been for decades. It's a huge event. All the grassroots are there. A lot of the local politicos are there. And as always, I know you're not going to be surprised, Rick Santorum lit it up. I heard great things from all the grassroots on the ground. I heard stuff from some of the political leaders. So I wanted you to have a chance to share in that excitement. So check it out and watch Rick Santorum at the Family Leader.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you for that very warm welcome. And Marilyn, thank you for that introduction. And thank Susan B. Anthony for the tremendous pro-life work that they've done in the courts, in the legislatures around the country, and obviously in Washington, D.C. And I can't come to Iowa and not first and foremost thank all of you for what you did for me in 2012. And I just am, Karen and I and the family are very, very grateful. And all I would say is just thank Bob Vanderplatz and many from the Family Leader who stood with me and helped me, drag me across the finish line here in Iowa. And I'm very, very appreciative. And the only thing I'd say is for those of you who voted for Mitt Romney, I told you so. Just saying, it's really great to be here, and it's great to be back. It's great to follow Michael Youssef. In fact, listening to Michael, I was riveted, as I'm sure you were, and all he was saying, and he sort of laid out a lot of what I was going to allude to, but he did so in such great detail of where America is today. And here he is at 75 years of age, out here, talking to you, going across the country, across the world, talking about the decline in the greatest country in the history of the world. And I have to say, people say, well, why am I still doing this? I mean, I was first elected to Congress 34 years ago, ran for president 12 years ago, but I'm still out working. And let me tell you the reason I'm doing so is because during my watch, America has gone to the dogs. You can say, well, Senator, you did everything you could. I mean, you were in Congress, you fought for life, you fought for marriage, you fought for all of the things and the traditions that made this country great. You even wrote a book, It Takes a Family, to counter that, to talk about the centrality of family against all of the efforts from the left, from the Stalinists. I don't even call them progressives. They are Stalinists. These are people who are using the power of government to destroy their opponents and to impose radical socialistic ideas on this country. These are Stalinists, and they're winning. Let me just repeat that. They're winning. Now, we can look out and you say, oh, we can delight at the fact that right now they're going through a very difficult time with a president that, like Stalinists, they have lied about for 3 years. They have ignored reality and gaslit the American public, but that doesn't matter. They'll just move on if they have to, because all they care about is maintaining power. That's what they're about. It's all about power. It's about them imposing their will on you from Washington. And they will use George Clooney in Hollywood, and they will use all the professors at the university and all the institutions that they now control. They will use those to indoctrinate your children and to transform this country. It is happening. And so you ask me why I'm out here, is because I have to get up and look myself in the mirror and say, during my watch, when I actually had some ability to do something about it, I was in the room. I was on the national stage. America failed. And I don't know about you, but I can't go and say, well, I'm doing okay. I'll be all right. I've got enough money. I'll make it through my time. And that's good enough. It's not good enough. Michael was right talking about Nehemiah and talking about the importance and power of prayer. Absolutely. And I'm talking to a great group of folks who pray, and I want to encourage you to do everything that Michael said. But also, Michael talked about Nehemiah and the need to act. The need to act. And to act boldly, courageously. He talked about too many people are worried about what the world thinks about them. I remember coming to Iowa, one of the first times I came to Iowa, I went to a Baptist church to speak to a group of pastors. Now, I come from Pennsylvania, and we don't have a whole lot at the time. We didn't have a whole lot of evangelicals in Pennsylvania. We just didn't. And I'm a Catholic, and so when I remember getting up there, and one of the first questions I got at this church was, "What's your verse?" And I'm like, "All of them?" So I sort of dodged it, and then I left. I said, "Wow, I need to get a verse." And then immediately, I mean, it's like almost like a lightning bolt hit me. It's like, no. Because you'd get a verse for political purposes. That is just evil. So I vowed never to have a verse because I didn't want it to look like I was just trying to get along. After I got out of politics, I found a verse. And now it's my verse. But I can do it because I'm not doing it to win any votes. And what my verse is John 15:18. If they hate you, remember, they hated me first. If you are not hated by these Stalinist leftists out here, you are not doing your job. You have to be bold. You have to take on challenges and not be afraid. That's my message to you today, and let me talk about it from the standpoint of action. What you heard Marilyn talk about, it's a great setup for me, because she talked about all the things that are happening in Iowa and in dozens and dozens of other states across this country. We're seeing a movement in this country of people leaving New York and New Jersey and Connecticut and California and Oregon, etc. And where are they moving to? They're moving to Iowa, they're moving to Florida, they're moving to Texas and Idaho. Why? Because the states are doing great work. The states are leading the country. The federal government is failing. And you can say, well, we can just elect more good people. I heard this from Michael, I heard it from Marilyn. We'll just need to elect more godly people. Okay, how's that been working out for us in Washington, D.C.? And let me throw on top of that what just happened last week, because we need to deal with this. The Republican Party is no longer the party of life. It is no longer the party of marriage. It is no longer the party of limited government. It is no longer the party of balanced budgets. It is a party that doesn't want to cut any entitlement programs. I came to Congress in 1990, and the budget deficit at that point was around $3 trillion. It's 10 times that. When I fought on the floor of the United States Senate for a balanced budget amendment, remember, folks, in 1995, a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution passed the House. It got 2/3 votes, and it came to the Senate, and we had 2/3 votes. And the day before the vote, a Republican switched his vote from yes to no, and we lost by 1 vote. The budget deficit at that point was not even $5 trillion. It's now 34 trillion, almost 35 trillion, and it's going to go up 2 more trillion every year for as far as the eye can see. And candidly, it has gone up under Republican and Democratic administrations. That's the truth. And there is no plan in Washington from either party to do anything about it. None. They're all running scared. Go ahead, elect more good people to sit in the same caucus that has that same point of view. But if you look at the states are balancing their budgets. The states are creating educational choice. The states are passing pro-life laws. The states are doing things to protect and defend the dignity of the human person. So why wouldn't we, as a conservative movement, if there is such a thing still remaining, why wouldn't we want to get the states to have an intervention on the federal government? Why wouldn't we want to take what the remedy is in the Constitution which is Article 5. I don't know about you, but up until a few years ago, if you asked me what Article 5 of the Constitution is, I wouldn't be able to tell you. I could tell you what, Article 1 is the Congress, Article 2 is the President, Article 5 didn't have a clue. But Article 5 is the section of the Constitution which lays out how the Constitution is amended. And up until this point, there have been, since the founding, 17 amendments that have been added to the Constitution. There were 10 at the founding, so 27 total. Every single one of those amendments have been proposed by the Congress. Now, how many in this room, raise your hand if you believe that Congress is going to propose amendments to limit its power and authority? Raise your hand. Raise your hand if you think if they're going to pass an amendment that limits their terms. Raise your hand if they're going to pass an amendment that's going to limit their power to spend or tax. And yet, there is a provision in the Constitution that allows the entities that are actually governing as conservatives to gather and propose amendments to put restraint on the federal government without the federal government having any say in those amendments. Why? Because when the states gather at a convention of states and propose amendments at that convention, they immediately go to the state legislatures for ratification. The federal government has nothing to do with it other than to call the time and place of the convention. Why wouldn't conservatives rally behind something like this and say, this is the answer? You're looking for action? Go ahead, elect more conservatives from Iowa and see the big change you're going to see in Washington. It isn't happening. It won't happen. It is a swamp. And as much as we say we're going to elect conservatives, we elected a conservative president, Donald Trump, and the deficit grew enormously. You can say it was COVID. It was COVID. But it was a little excessive COVID. And we all went along with it. We always all go along with it. The reality is there is no pressure in Washington, D.C. to limit its power or its spending. I remember when I was a senator in Washington, I would get calls from people, swear to God, I would get calls from people saying, you need to pass a law. My neighbor's dog is barking and keeping me up at night. And believe it or not, there are people who introduce bills on this in Washington. The Constitution changed from the time our founders drafted it. The Constitution was structured to limit the power of the federal government by giving the states the power to veto legislation that infringed on states' power and the power and freedom of the American public. And that all changed 112 years ago. 112 years ago, an amendment passed by the progressives of the last turn of the century that eliminated the power of state legislatures to appoint United States senators. When that changed, I don't know if you know this or not, but prior to 1912, do you know how many senators had to agree to vote before there was ever a vote in the United States Senate? What percentage? 60%, 70%, 100%. No vote could be cast on the floor of the Senate unless every senator agreed to vote on the bill. Wonder why very little passed for the first 130 years of the Republic. The reason was because the Senate was there to protect you. And the progressive convinced us 100 and some years ago that we needed to be more of a democracy and less of a republic. And in so changing that, guess what happened? Senators now came to Washington instead of there to protect the state's interest because they were appointed by the legislatures to protect the state's interest. Now they had to go and get reelected. And once you have to get reelected, guess what happens? you start doing things for folks to get you reelected. And that's where we are. And now they're trying to eliminate the filibuster, which means we would have wide open season. Imagine all of the bills that would have passed to grow the size and scope of the federal government if you only needed 51 votes in the Senate. We'd have a British healthcare system by now, and worse. And you don't think that's going to happen anytime soon? Just wait till the Democrats get control again. They may not do it this time. Praise God, they may not. But it'll be sometime, and they will do it. So we're sitting on a time bomb right now. And some people here in Iowa are afraid of something bad might happen at this convention of states. A convention that its sole purpose is simply to propose amendments, and any amendment that's proposed has to get 3/4 of the state legislatures of this country to approve it. The highest standard of anything in this country, anywhere. And yet people are afraid of trusting the folks who are acting responsible at the state level to try to put some shackles on the federal level. This is what I talked about of people being governed by fear. People being governed by fear of what other people may say about you, but also not trusting your fellow man with the opportunity to do great things. And you may say, well, bad things can happen. As if bad things aren't going to happen if we keep doing what we're doing. How many believe that if we don't do anything as an intervention, that this country is going to automatically just sort of get better and deficits are going to go down and we're going to fix all these systemic problems of spending and expansion of federal power and more presidential authority centralizing in the presidency? How many think it's going to happen without an intervention? Raise your hand. Okay, so where's the fear? If there's all but a certainty it's going to happen, what are you worried about? It might happen sooner? If something bad happens? Do you not trust the founders in the mechanism they put in the Constitution? And they even say it. You know, it was the only amendment, Pastor Yusuf mentioned Catherine Drinkle Bowen. She also wrote a book called Miracle in Philadelphia, talking about the Constitution and the Constitutional Convention. And the reality is that the Constitutional Convention, there was only one amendment to the Constitution. There were many debated. Only one amendment that was passed without debate and unanimously. And you know what it was? To allow the state legislatures to have a convention to propose amendments. It's one we all agreed to. The South, the North, big states, small states, border states, coastal states. They were divided on everything. They weren't divided on that. They understood the reality that big centralized governments get bigger and get more authoritarian over time because it happened in every republic in the history of man, and it's happening here. And so they provided a mechanism to address it. And we have folks within our own ranks here in Iowa and some states across the country. It's this resolution that I'm proposing with Convention of States would limit the power and scope of the federal government, allow amendments to be proposed to do that, to put fiscal constraints on the federal government, and to suggest term limits not just on members of Congress, but on all executives. That means the Tony Faucis of the world in the deep state. What are you afraid of? The reality is that there are 29 states right now where both houses of the legislatures are controlled by Republicans. It was 32 up until the last election. And with this election, we may get to the number we need to actually pass this resolution, which is 34 states pass this resolution. We have a convention. And what are we afraid of? We're afraid of ourselves. We're afraid that the state legislators who are going to be proposing this amendment, this resolution, are somehow these state legislators who are acting responsibly and doing things that we all agree with, that somehow or another they're the threat and Washington is not. That makes no sense. It makes no sense. And so I would just encourage you to pray for this effort. Pray for this effort because I believe, look, I'm not running for office again. I'm pouring my time and energy as someone who you supported because I was the conservative cause guy, just like you supported Mike Huckabee, because he was a guy that actually had principles and he fought for them and he didn't change them and he believes in them. Mike has joined me in this effort. We are here because we know how Washington works and we know there are very few avenues left, and it isn't the Republican Party anymore. That party is changing. You may say has changed, but the reality is we have to do things here where conservatism still lives. In the states, and if we can get 34 states, just to remind you, there will be no Democrat in Iowa that will vote for this. Democrats in every left-wing magazine and newspaper and media site all oppose this. Every left-wing every progressive Stalinist organization vehemently opposes this. And yet we have folks within our own ranks who oppose it. What are we afraid of? Ladies and gentlemen, I'm pleading with you. I think this is America's last best hope. It is the one the founders gave us for such a time as this. And if we don't use it, we will be that generation who not only lost America, but were too cowardly to take up the cudgel to save it. I don't want to be counted in that number, and I hope Iowa doesn't either. Thank you, and God bless.